Happy New Year's everyone, Flip here, and today we're going to be talking about Yume Mizuki, Mizuki, whose kit we've just acquired details on, and it's not looking good. But before we go over the kit, as always, if at any points during the video you're entertained or informed, make sure to drop a like and even consider subscribing, as I talk on various topics regarding Genshin's meta and I'll try to keep you updated. Shout out to all my lovely channel members, I really do appreciate your support, and with that, let's begin. Alright, so Mizuki is a 5-star standard banner character who is an Onimo catalyst, because we definitely needed another in the game 100%, especially right after Lanyan. However, Mizuki does somewhat separate herself, as her primary role is to be an on-field swirl DPS. Kind of like the way we've been playing Sucrose in on-field driving taser teams. Being a catalyst, her normal attacks are obviously going to be Onimo imbued, but besides that they don't do anything noteworthy. Her kit is mostly going to be centralized around her elemental skill, which will make her enter a special state where she hovers. Hoyoverse really is getting creatively bankrupt, and in this state, party members will deal increased swirl damage based on Mizuki's elemental mastery. And on top of this, Mizuki will automatically target nearby enemies and do AoE Onimo damage. The fire rate looks to be about once a second, and this state will end when Mizuki leaves the field. Now the biggest problem with this skill is that during its uptime, Mizuki cannot do normal attacks, and the reason why this is such a big deal is because with the design of her kit, it seems like she wants to be played as an on-field Onimo driver, as she or her teammates will no longer do increased swirl damage when she's off-field. But if you can't normal attack with her, that completely kills her synergy with units like Yulon and Jingcho, you know, some of the staples of driving teams. Also, things like Fischl C6 do more damage based on normal attacks, so you're bleeding damage there as well, and Fischl is one of the only characters you can use for this type of taser team, due to her energy holding the team together so your other electric characters can have lower energy needs, and just doing very solid damage overall, especially in single target, which does help taser teams out a lot as it's mostly an AoE team. At the very least, the swirl buff you do get from it is okay, it makes your swirls do a bit more damage, which is nice, but the problem is that even with this buff, swirls are only a portion of your overall damage. It's why optimally Sucrose will sacrifice using a higher EM weapon to use something like Hakushin Ring, as her swirls don't matter more than buffing the rest of the team. If this was a global transformative reaction buff, so things like electrocharged and swirls could benefit, this would be significantly better, but alas, that isn't how it works. Also, in this video, I'm mostly going to be talking about taser teams, as this is one of the only teams that gives you the easiest access to double swirling. Mizuki is a swirl-based character, so a team like Taser that swirls the most is going to be her most optimal team, and I don't really see her having great teams outside of this. Now, for her elemental burst, it's similar to Lanyan's, in which it will do an instance of burst damage that groups, and then afterwards it will summon a fucking rat that follows the active character, and at intervals it will throw down a snack, so you know it's going to be throwing me down. And if your active character picks up the snack, it will either do two things. If you're above 70% HP, then it will do an AoE instance of Onimo damage, and if you are below 70% HP, it will heal the active character, and if you don't pick it up in time, it will just explode as an AoE Onimo hit. Now, like with the rest of Mizuki's kit, there are some problems with this burst. The grouping is pretty much going to define how useful this is, but as of now we don't have footage of how good it is. Hopefully it's on the level of Lanyan's, if not then whatever, I guess. There is now footage of her grouping. It is not good. It is like Hazo C1 tier. Now, moving to the rest of her burst, the biggest problems come with her snack mechanic. The healing it provides is very bad. At 1000 EM, it's only healing for around 2500 health, which is nothing, and this healing will only occur if you're below 70% HP. And on top of this, if you do heal, that means you lose a swirl because you lose an instance of Onimo damage. And the reason why all of this sucks together is because, as I said, you can't really use Yulon or Jingcho with her, so your Hydra options are just Furina or Kokomi, in which Furina is obviously going to be the most ideal as she enables more damage, but it seems like she has close to no synergy with Furina at all. She has worse fanfare generation than Bennett. On top of this, her healing is low enough to where you won't be able to overheal on her, therefore you won't be able to trigger Furina as A1. So if you want any form of team-wide healing, then you're going to have to use the prototype Amber, which is not that optimal. Also, if you use her burst while in your skill state, if at any point you decide to swap off to heal the rest of your team that is getting passively drained by Furina, if that happens, you just lose her buff from her skill and it will be on cooldown. So if you ever use Mizuki's skill while in her burst state, you kind of just have to commit to it, and then just hope your team doesn't die when you swap into them. Who designed this unit? Why did they bring back the Dea and SIGEWINNE kit designers? And it gets even egregious when you look at the rest of her kit, because her base skill uptime is 5 seconds. So to remedy this, they made her Ascension 1 give her more uptime, so that it can be 10 seconds. And that is her entire Ascension 1. What is the point of doing this and not giving her an actual Ascension passive? Was giving this character 10 seconds of skill uptime going to be this game breaking? What is going on with this? And then her second Ascension passive is actually pretty good, it will give Mizuki 100 EM when teammates hit opponents with a swirlable element. So to summarize, Mizuki is supposed to be played as an on-field unit whose kit revolves around continuously swirling in her skill state. So this means you want to pair her with off-field appliers, ideally Electro and Hydra ones, so that you can enable her swirls, but just not ones that are triggered through normal attacks like Yulon or Xingqiu. Then moving into her team options, you still do have solid taser ones, but they're going to be very dysfunctional, and I don't picture them feeling all that great. The first team that comes to mind would just be Furina or Kokume as your Hydra applicator, and then the Bird duo. Then the second team concept that comes to mind for me could be a type of double Onoma team, as other Onoma units can take advantage of her swirl buffs. However, that means another problem comes into play because one of the main strengths of double Onoma teams was the fact that it was a quick swap team. You have rotations where you can use your skill with Kazuha, set up your burst, then you could use Venti's skill and burst, and while Venti's burst was active and while Kazuha's slash was also active, you could still use your skill with Kazuha on field. But you just can't do this with Mizuki as her swirl buff only works while she's on field. So if you switch out to swirl again on Kazuha, then Mizuki no longer has the swirl buff, so she can't even be used effectively on these teams really. All of her teams just have this really weird layer of jank to them for no real reason, as they want you to stay on field with her, but that just hinders her team options. If you look at Circle's taser teams, you have so many different rotations you can play the team on, as you're allowed to swap to any unit at any time. And as long as you're weaving in normal attacks, your damage output isn't heavily hindered, even if you aren't playing the team perfectly. And this would let you lower energy requirements through catching particles or using skills more than once a rotation, which is something Mizuki can't really do without losing a decent chunk of her damage. I just don't understand what kind of team they want you to play with her. Are we really not having Capitano playable in Natlan for this? But yeah, she just doesn't have that many teams, her kit is very dysfunctional, and I guess since she's a standard banner unit, I can go over her vertical investment like her constellations and weapon. Her weapon's going to be just a massive EM stat stick. You get 120 elemental mastery after triggering a swirl, 96 after hitting an enemy with an elemental skill, and 32 after your burst hits an opponent, on top of it being a 265 EM weapon as well. So overall, including the base substat, at refinement 1 that is 513 EM, it will be a very good weapon for Mizuki's personal damage, but it doesn't really do anything for the team, and by extension for any of the other Onoma drivers it won't really be that much better than Hakushin. Now for her constellation, C1 is a single target swirl buff that against one enemy will make it so a single swirl will do 900% increased damage, based on Mizuki's elemental mastery. Based on the wording, it seems like this can be triggered at least 3 times per skill cast, maybe 2, but regardless this should help her teams clear single target a lot better. Her C2 also theoretically looks very good. I'm not gonna read all that, but basically at 1000 EM she gives a 20% damage bonus, and this damage bonus is only active when her skill is active. The biggest problem with this buff though is the fact that it's snapshotable, so that means if you're using someone like Fischl who's going to be on most of her teams, she just won't pass this buff onto Fischl ever. More anti-synergy, you love to see it. Constellation 3 boosts her skill talent, C4 removes the dumb restriction the skill had, and picking up a trait now both heals and deals damage while also restoring some energy. C5 is for her elemental burst, and lastly her C6 makes it so that during her skill state, swirls are now going to be able to crit at a 30 to 100 ratio, and this is quite a strong constellation, but it's a C6 so that's to be expected. To be honest, most of her constellations overall are pretty good, so if you do get multiple copies of her by losing 50-50 or by pulling on her banner if you hate your primogems, then thankfully it does pay off compared to some other standard characters who are essentially capped at C0. I guess we can compare her to the other standard characters in which it's really hard to judge her value, as I don't know whether to gauge her as a support or as a DPS. As a support or enabler, she kind of just loses to Jean, assuming you have access to Furina, and then as a DPS, her teams are just lower in comparison to Keqing or Tignari, the same units who also use Fischl a lot on their teams, and then Diluc Plant teams are obviously just going to be better than any of the teams you can make with Mizuki. So I don't know. I don't think she's as bad as Chi-Chi, but she also isn't the best thing you could get. Even Mona has very meta use cases with Mualani in some setups, as a double Hydro enabler that doesn't apply much Hydro, in which again, that type of Mualani team would be stronger than anything you could build with Mizuki. Hell, even if you want to forego the standard comparison and compare it to the 2 good Onoma drivers you have right now, Sucrose has no ICD on her skill and burst and is able to use normal attacks for Yulon and Xingqiu, and she has much better grouping on her skill, which she can use frequently with sack frags, where Mizuki only gets 1 mid-cast of grouping a rotation. On top of this, Sucrose gives EM to the entire team, buffing the amount of electric charge damage everyone does. So if you look at the team DPS of Mizuki versus Sucrose for a driving team, with the rough calculations I've done but don't feel confident sharing yet, she really is just on par with Sucrose's best driving teams, instead of being a direct upgrade. And then looking at Lanyan, even though theoretically she's the worst damage-wise, with her C2 she's effectively immortal under her shield, giving her the most comfort of the options, and allowing you to get away with more offensive characters like Yulon over Xingqiu much easier. And hell, even if you want to say that Mizuki's better than Lanyan and Sucrose at driving, both Sucrose and Lanyan have much better play outside of driving teams, where it's basically Mizuki's only team. As she isn't that good of a healer, her damage profile is bad from off-field, and her consistent off-field Onoma application will mess up auras, making reactions become more inconsistent. All in all, Mizuki is quite a bad character in her version 1 state, which is not something something I like to say, especially with how much I like her design, but she really needs buffs. She's very dysfunctional, doesn't work well with that many characters, and there's just like not a single part of her kit that shines well in comparison to other units. She's just another honor mode catalyst character, we have enough of them, and if her role is just being a driver, she's not very unique. Better characters like Sucrose and Lanyan can do that with less restrictions. I get that she's a standard character, but at the same time it doesn't excuse releasing weak characters, and she should at least be on par with the 4 stars and not just worse. Lanyan is literally free and is going to be able to do her role while also having play in other teams. But with that, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment your thoughts on Mizuki, as I would love to hear it and I respond to almost every single comment. Channel members, I love you and appreciate your support. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you guys on the flip side. Peace.